Hello and welcome. My name is Mel Tingy. I'm the Chief Technology and Strategy Officer for STG. We're a software consulting firm located in Salt Lake City, serving clients all throughout the United States. Today is the second in our Executive Excellence webinar series focused specifically to the executives within organizations, the CEO and the rest of the C-suite, in helping them make sense of technology, the change involved in implementation of systems, and really working to help simplify and kind of demystify the technology landscape for business executives. Today with me, I have Dr. Ken Napton, a very good friend of mine. I think, Ken, we've known each other for well over 20 years.
It's been a long time.
It's been a long time, and I've always appreciated your friendship. I've appreciated your wisdom. And I always leave our conversations, whether it's a lunch meeting or any other event, I always leave with a sense of appreciation, a sense of, there's a sense of even inspiration that I find in the way that you approach things, the way you think about things. You're just genuinely a good person, a good thinker. And I think today's conversation is going to be very meaningful for our audience, specifically CEOs. The focus and topic of today's conversation is around the topic of tech debt. And we've specifically honed in on really working to try to simplify that concept, to empower CEOs to understand tech debt in the context of how they make strategic business technology decisions. So before we get started, I'd like to just give you an opportunity to introduce yourself, and then we'll jump in.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, first of all, thank you. I feel exactly the same way. It's always fun chatting with you, and in whatever the circumstance is, I always walk away edified. So thank you. I'm grateful to be here with you today, and I'm excited to talk about a topic that is near and dear to my heart. I've been dealing with the effects of tech debt for many, many years in many different organizations. So just as a quick introduction. I started out as a software developer many moons ago. It's been a long time, but kind of worked my way up through the technical ranks, and then kind of worked into the CTO role at a couple of startups. And I remember early on in that role, we were software companies building software that we would sell, and that's what I was responsible for. And I remember the VP of marketing coming to me, or the finance guy coming to me and saying, "Hey, what should we use for our software? How do we tie stuff in?" And I'm like, "I don't care." Right? I don't know.
Use what you want.
Yeah, I don't know. And of course, that was a horrible answer. Mm-hmm. And so then I kind of learn more about the operational side of the business and more from the underlying data perspective. And that's when I kind of, moved over into the CIO chair. And that's where I've been for the last 20 years in various industries, mostly very highly regulated industries. Mm-hmm. So I've been in financial services, healthcare, that kind of world.
And I know most recently, Costa Vida has brought you on as their CIO.
Yeah, so I'm currently working for Costa Vida and Fat Cats.
Cool.
They're two separate companies owned by the same, they share ownership.
Okay.
And so they've brought me in to help bridge the gap between those two companies, help bring the back-end services together where it makes sense, and to help them from that perspective. So yeah, that's been a fun ride so far.
Well, very good. Well, they're fortunate to have you.
Oh, thank you.
I know for me personally, at a very personal level, Costa Vida is on our menu about once a month.
Nice, thank you.
and
please eat the shrimp. We've got the new shrimp tacos.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
They have a great thing on Black Friday that for probably the last 4 years, I always buy a whole bunch of gift cards, and you get the extra free money with it. And so I'm now to a point where I've bought it. I buy enough each year to where because it's only on the menu about once a month, the gift cards that I buy on Black Friday around Thanksgiving last me for the whole year. So it's
nice.
It's kind of a fun thing.
Very good.
Where we get together. And I love their app. It's kind of cool how they do the point structure, and it's kind of incentivizing to say, "Oh, okay, I've got enough for a free meal."
Yeah.
Anyway,
it's
kind
nice.
of fun.
The app is fairly new, as I understand. But yeah, so
Anyway,
Anyway, happy to be there. It's a fun place to be. I've enjoyed both of those brands, Fat Cats and Costa Vida, for a while. So it's fun to be,
Very cool.
helping them out.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, let's jump in.
Sure.
What I'd like you to do up front is just take a moment and describe in that kind of your classic simple language. And I love the way, by the way, the book we're going to be referencing a number of times is a book that Dr. Napton wrote called Unveiling Tech Debt. It's a quick read. All told, you're into it about 75 pages. You can move through the book, fairly quickly. It's written in a language that an executive, a CEO, a C-suite individual can easily digest the information. And so a number of times I'm going to reference this book in the context of our conversation. But take a moment and just simply describe and help articulate what is tech debt.
Yeah, so it's interesting how that term has evolved over the years, right? So the term tech debt was originally coined by Ward Cunningham back in the early 2000s when he was one of the signers of the original Agile Manifesto. And so originally he coined the term to specifically refer to software development. So those decisions that software developers might make in order to hit a date, to get something out the door, right? So maybe we're going to not necessarily cut corners, but we might need to make a decision that's not necessarily in the best long-term interest of the product, but it's going to help us get this out the door on time, right? So that's where the term first kind of came into the vernacular.
Okay.
Right? Over the years, so first of all, in the CIO seat, I'm looking at tech debt from kind of a larger perspective, right? So it's not just the custom software development, but when I'm looking across my entire infrastructure, there are things that maybe there's decisions that have been made, years ago, or decisions that have been made in order to solve some business need very quickly that maybe weren't in the best interest of the long-term, benefit of the company. So the term, in my mind, kind of started to evolve a little bit from custom software development to enterprise kind of level. And so the way that I look at tech debt is not just those maybe bad decisions that were made, but it's really just the result of decisions. And the end result of those decisions is that the technology is holding back the company from achieving their strategic goals. Now, there might be a positive decision, right? Maybe it was a good decision, but because of changes in the industry, changes by the vendor, changes wherever, that now it's preventing us from doing what we need to do, right? That's tech debt.
I love that explanation. It's interesting in the context of where the word originated. It has definitely grown in its definition very broadly. I come from a similar background as you in the context that I came up through the ranks of a software engineer and then began to take on more kind of business understanding of technology. And I find that the word or that phrase tech debt, if you say it in with different audiences and different contexts, it literally can mean radically different things.
Yeah.
It can elicit emotion where sometimes you never anticipated the emotion. It can elicit confusion. I've had C-level executives, when I've used the term, feel like that it's being used as a manipulative tactic.
Oh yeah.
They feel like they're being bullied into something, and so I think that from even the perspective of how valuable it is to understand it correctly, the book is very timely, and it's something that, especially with AI on our doorstep, it's something that organizations where they may have, been sweeping that tech debt under the rug or not making the full payments like they should have been over the years. If you kind of equate tech debt to maybe credit card debt, that it's almost like, hey, the piper's here and the piper has got to be paid. And so to strip out the emotion that oftentimes exists, that I feel like that's the real value of accurately understanding tech debt in the context of business, that you can sit down as mature professionals and talk about it in a way that you're actually getting to good, clear decision making, so that people understand each other correctly. You've pulled the emotion away, and that then you can move forward in the right way.
Yeah, for sure. And I want to react to a couple of things that you said there. So, the emotion, right, and the kind of manipulative aspect, right? I think there's a lot to that. Typically, when we talk about tech debt, especially if you're talking to software developers or technical folks, there is this kind of visceral, emotional, first of all, on the one hand, we might be calling their baby ugly, right? Yep. Hey, you made some bad decisions. You might be trying to blame. Hey, why did you make this decision? Tech debt historically has always been a very negative. It has had a very negative connotation. And that was one of the reasons that, quite frankly, one of the reasons that I wrote the book is because for me, I started to kind of have this shift of a mindset that tech debt is not always a bad thing. And so one of the kind of analogies that I use is thinking about tech debt in the same way that we think about financial debt, right? You mentioned credit card payments, right? It's the same thing, and that's again one of the key concepts that was kind of floating around in my head when I was thinking about putting pen to paper and putting this down.
Yeah.
Because as I mentioned a few minutes ago, historically we think about tech debt as bad decisions. Right, some bad decision was made because we're trying to hit a date. The reality is that we make decisions all the time in technology. We make decisions about what vendor we're going to use. We make decisions about what tech stack we're going to use. We make decisions about how these things are going to meet our business needs. And they may not be bad decisions, right? They may be the right decision at the time. But then something changes. Maybe that vendor goes out of business. Or that vendor gets acquired and their pricing model changes,
Or they stopped their roadmap. Maybe they went through an acquisition, and what was on their roadmap that was going to keep them relevant,
right?
Maybe they cut back their engineering, and all of a sudden, as a consumer of their product, you all of a sudden realize, oh my goodness, there were 5 features we were hoping for in the next 12 months. We're not going to get them.
And now we're not going to get them. That's right. And so now you realize, wait a minute, we were depending on that. This can no longer be part of our tech stack because we have to find a solution to give us what we need because they're not going to now. So all of a sudden, this good decision now becomes tech debt. Right? And so that's why, for me, I started thinking about tech debt in different terms. Financial debt is neither good nor bad. It just is. And it's a strategic lever that you can pull. Sometimes you'll say, look, we're going to take on a little more financial debt in order to achieve some business goal. And as long as we're paying that down over time, then we're good. Tech debt's exactly the same way, right? We just have to make sure we're paying it down. That's where the challenge comes in.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
So what I want to do next is I want to create clarity through examples.
Okay.
So I want to first articulate what you said up front. In the world of custom software, there still exists the notion of how decisions are made, whether it's from the product team or the engineering team, where, again, I'm not casting wrong or blame in this, but there's decisions that get made where maybe a feature, if it was complete, had all 10 parts to the requirement. And for a variety of reasons, they decide we're only going to do 6 of those 10, knowing full well that the remaining 4 actually are still a tech debt component. Maybe there's still a manual process that's still lingering. Maybe the ability to do automated regression testing isn't fully there. And so because that tech debt got left in the custom code scenario or example, the team is going to feel that burden until a further decision is made in the future. So I'm going to kind of compare and contrast. That's the custom development side of the house.
Okay.
What I want to focus on for a moment are examples where we look at the technical stack of a business,
Okay.
an ERP system, a financial system, sales commission tool, regulation tools, a website, e-commerce solutions, things. These might be custom built, but in most situations, they're purchased.
Yep.
What we call typically commercial off-the-shelf packages. They're bought from a vendor. And I'm not going to name vendors because I don't want to go down any path of ascribing which vendors have more or less tech debt, but I'm going to stay more categorical in the context of the examples I just said. What I'd love to have you describe are some packaged solution tech debt examples that our CEOs could relate with. Like, because you've been in that chair, where you were the CEO in these organizations. You are now
The CIO.
CIO, where you see the landscape of the business technology systems, and you recognize to some degree we have some problems. We have some tech debt that we've got to manage. Give me some examples that you've experienced.
Yeah. So a great question, and that is kind of the crux of the matter, right? Is this whole concept of, can something off the shelf, can a vendor that provides something off the shelf, can that be tech debt? And so there is the aspect from the custom development side that there may be some tech debt built up in their solutions from their custom software development. And again, to be clear, that's not what we're talking about, right? Because that could exist anywhere. As vendors build their solutions, provide their solutions, sell their solutions into organizations, we as the customer buy that in order to produce a specific result within our tech stack, right? We buy it because it's going to do X, Y, Z for us. And sometimes we'll buy it knowing that X, Y, Z, we're buying it for X, but Y and Z are coming, right? It's on their roadmap. And like you just said, sometimes their roadmap changes. And so we then have to look at that and say, well, okay, is this piece of software that we have in our tech stack, is it still meeting our needs if we're not going to get these other things that we thought were coming? Okay, so that's one aspect. And again, you already kind of touched on that. There's also the concept that just over time, our needs change, right? And so we purchase some software, maybe it's an ERP system, a financial system, whatever it might be, and we say, you know what, we're buying this to perform this service for us, and it's doing it really well. But as our company grows, or as we move in different directions, or our strategy changes, we have different needs. Well, maybe we never had that on the horizon. We never had that in our mind when we bought this software. But now we have a need that we didn't have before that this can't fulfill for us. Again, that's a decision that was made before. The decision was to go with this vendor. But now the landscape has changed within our organization, and there may be a competitor to that vendor that does provide what we need. Well, so all of a sudden, this is now tech debt because it's holding us back. We can't do what we need with this piece of software. And it's no fault of that vendor. It's just that's not a service they provide. That's not functionality they provide. And so that's why we have to constantly be looking at our tech stack and assessing that against the needs of our organization as our strategy changes, so that we can recognize whether what we have within our tech stack is going to meet our needs or not. So I can give you a couple of examples.
Yeah, I'd love to hear them.
And I know we said we're not going to mention specific names, so I'll try not to mention the actual software. But we had an ERP system. I was working for a very large organization, global organization. We had an ERP system in place. And as we implemented this system, rather than using it off the shelf, we made some configuration changes. And we made actually some custom code changes to that system. And now this was a SaaS solution.
Which is actually pretty typical.
Yeah, it's very typical.
Yeah.
Right? And we have to be, this is where we have to be really careful about configuration versus customization, right? In this particular organization, we had done a lot of customization to this particular solution. And over time, while that met the needs of the organization, the problem that ended up causing was that as that solution now needed to upgrade, they came out with an upgrade from the vendor's side. In order to apply that upgrade, we had a whole bunch of work we had to go through in order to take this customization and get it to work with the upgraded version. And so that became tech debt. The code that we had customized became tech debt for us, because now we couldn't just accept the upgrade. It took us 18 months to be able to accept an upgrade because of all the code changes we had made. So was that a good decision? Was it a bad decision? Well, it met the needs, right? The custom code was doing what it needed to do, but it also prevented us when they came out and said, hey, we have a new feature that you can make use of. We couldn't make use of it for 18 months, right? So that becomes tech debt. And again, it's not good or bad. It just is. So we have to make sure that we're looking at those kinds of
That's
things.
a great example. I love that. I have had similar situations throughout my career where one that comes to mind as you were talking was when GDPR entered into the mix. So for those of you who are not familiar, GDPR is the data privacy standard that the EU created, and that has literally influenced privacy throughout all of the world.
Yeah.
They led in the thinking and the clarification of what that meant to have an individual essentially be in control of the data that's
Of their own data.
their own data. And because of GDPR in the EU and now it being largely accepted in most of the world, if you were in any way interfacing from a business standpoint with the EU, you had to show that your systems were GDPR compliant.
Right.
And so we were literally pushed right into a situation where a system that was working wonderfully for us, an off-the-shelf purchase solution, became a major barrier to becoming GDPR compliant. And as we worked with them, because they didn't largely work, actually they stated we don't do anything with the EU, so we don't have any motivation for going down this path.
It's a common misconception.
All of a sudden, we were at a crossroads where there were two main GDPR requirements. One was the ability to show where a person's private data was being used.
Where it resides,
And then also the right of erasure. The ability for them to say, hey, I no longer want an account in your system.
Right.
Prove to me that you've removed all of my data from your system.
Yep.
And because of how central this system was in our technology landscape, we couldn't be compliant with either of those. So I was working very closely with general counsel within the company, obviously with this company to actually figure out how to do it.
Yeah.
We ultimately figured out a mechanism for us through one of their APIs to write some of our own custom code to meet the requirement. Later, the company did in fact start doing business in the EU, so they very quickly added that feature. But it was a very tense situation for our company for almost 2 years.
Yeah.
Because we had to be compliant by a certain date.
Right.
In order to meet that date, we had to make an investment to do some things to make sure we could meet that need.
Yeah, because the vendor didn't have to be
Because the
compliant,
vendor
right? They didn't care.
Yeah.
And in reality, they actually should care, because you don't have to be doing business in the EU to fall under GDPR, right?
Correct.
Anybody, if some resident comes over here and swipes their credit card here, that system has to be GDPR compliant.
Has to be compliant.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Crazy.
anyway, and these two examples, we could literally spend hours and hours talking about examples.
For sure. Yep.
I just wanted to highlight a couple, and I think that we've definitely made that point to articulate, number one, how real it is.
Yeah.
I personally believe that almost every system within an organization's landscape has some degree of technical debt.
Yeah. So that's a great point, right? So whenever I talk about this topic, that question comes up, right? How do we get to zero? The answer is you don't.
Correct.
Right? You are never going to get to zero. Even, it's just like when you buy a new car, right? You drive the car off the lot and it immediately starts to depreciate, right? Same thing, as soon as you put a new technology in place, you start to accrue tech debt. Why? Because even if it's a SaaS solution, at some point, there's going to be an upgrade to that. or if it's a custom developed solution, at some point you're going to have some new software, some new version you're going to want to roll out. As soon as you implement something, you have to maintain it, you have to support it, and there's going to be new features that are desired for that. And so that is when tech debt starts to accumulate. So you're never going to be at zero. So thank you for addressing that, because you're never going to get there.
Yeah,
right? That shouldn't be the goal.
Yeah, and I've had similar conversations with executives, because they'll oftentimes have a mindset where they say, how do we move this to being, because they'll view it as a positive or negative topic.
Right.
And I,
That's right.
I, like you, try to say we shouldn't ascribe positive or negative, good or bad to the topic. Let's ascribe fact.
That's right.
And fiction.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
What
right.
is fact? What is fiction? Because there is no ability to move tech debt completely out of the equation because of the reality that there is usage. I love in your book how one of the problems that exists in the world of technology is the when we use the wrong metaphors to describe. I've personally seen how when you use the metaphor of a construction project to technology, you get it wrong.
Yep.
Your analogy of talking about technology more in the context of a golf course is brilliant, because when you make a decision to put a golf course in, if I'm the city of Bountiful, the city of South Salt Lake, the city of Draper, and I decide to put a golf course in, there is no one in their right mind who would think that we don't need to buy a mower, we don't need to buy staff to care for the grass, we don't need to have all the things necessary.
Water, yeah, that's right.
They think, well, we just need to have somebody there to ensure that the tee times get off properly, take payment. You just the whole structure, the physical nature of that, people would think, well, there's no logic in you not actually caring for the course.
That's right.
And technology has to be cared for in that same way. So one of the things that is so interesting about tech debt is that when you talk about it factually, you also begin to understand just like throwing a rock in a pond, the ripple effects that happened as a result of tech debt.
Yeah.
And so sometimes the organization will ascribe the effects of tech debt as tech debt, and I don't believe that's the case. I think those are ramifications of tech debt.
Yeah.
They're not the tech debt itself. And sometimes those can be used as justification or rationale for cost-cutting measures. For example, if I've seen some organizations who, because they didn't manage tech debt, their support costs went up.
Right.
That are not in the technology group. Maybe the customer support people or different people are having to do way more manual processes. And so as you implement a new system, you can do cost reduction because those employees can either be laid off or repurposed. That isn't tech debt. That's the ramification of tech debt.
That's right.
How have you seen that in your career?
Yeah, I think that's a great example, right? And I think there are. I think your analogy of kind of the ripple effect, right, is spot on. And again, that's one of the other reasons that I decided to write the book, is because prior to this, I didn't have any way to quantify tech debt. So when we talked about tech debt, I was working for a company that used that term a lot. All of the executives, the CEO, CFO, right, they were all talking, oh, we have so much tech debt here. And every time I would sit down and talk to them and say, well, what does that mean to you? They were talking often about the effects of the tech debt, not the tech debt itself, right? And it was true, we did have a lot of tech debt, but everybody defined it differently. No one could say specifically, well, this is what our tech debt is, and this is what it's doing to our business. They could see what it's doing from the ripple effects, right? And so that's another reason why I wrote the book, because I wanted to figure out a way to quantify the level of tech debt within an organization and to say, this is the root cause, right? Forget the ripple effects out here. What you're talking about is what is happening because of our tech debt. This is the tech debt. And that's when we started talking about the concept of tech debt leverage, right? So you can look at each individual system And because of the way that we quantify it now, you can look at that system and say, well, this system is 20% leveraged from a tech debt perspective. This one's 80% leveraged. So that starts to drive these conversations around prioritization. So when people start talking in the periphery around, well, we have all these expenses over here, we can pull that right back to, okay, they're coming from this. This is what's causing that, right? Just like you do a root cause analysis of any IT issue, right?
I love that.
You can come back to that and say, well, here it is. We've quantified it. We've measured it. If we fix this, the ripple effects will affect this out here, right?
Yeah.
These costs will come down.
Yeah, very well said. And the examples that you use in the book for measuring and quantifying tech debt, in my mind, they're brilliant, but they're brilliant in the context that a non-technical person can make sense of them. And that to me is the essence of where the dialogue starts to connect between the executives, where you can actually start having meaningful dialogue in that space.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for that. I really, that was something that I was really intentionally attempting to do. I wanted to be able to communicate to CEOs and CFOs specifically, what is tech debt? How do we quantify it? Because I wanted to talk in terms they understand. Right? Again, they all understand financial debt leverage, right? Yeah. You talk to a CEO, CFO, they get it.
They get it.
If we can start talking to them about tech debt in those similar terms, right, then we're going to be able to have much more meaningful conversations. So.
Okay, well, let's jump to the last section.
Okay.
My last section. You may have some other things you want to add, but
sure.
So the thing that jumped out at me as I read the book, that I was really, I found it to be kind of the gem in the book.
Okay.
And it's the topic of data and how tech debt has a very real, almost like if you think about even the way we've described tech debt in the context of custom code and these package solutions and so forth, those are these kind of, that's in my mind, like if you use that in an iceberg analogy, those are items that are kind of on the high end of the iceberg.
Yeah.
But the data is what's beneath the surface. And because I've personally lived in many organizations where the lack of investment around quality data was so poor that then when, they would have these little slivers of like a dashboard for the executives to see this metric, or a dashboard for the sales team to see these metrics. And these data tell us this, but behind those dashboards was so much incompleteness or lack of data quality, or as you state in the book, organizations will spend huge amounts of money to collect data, but they're not making sense of that data.
Yep.
And the reason why I believe this is such a gem in the book, and why it's something that creates both importance and urgency for CEOs to begin to take seriously cleaning up their data, is AI.
Yep, sure.
I've personally been involved in AI projects where the quality of the data that feeds into the large language model is directly connected to the quality of the AI output.
Yep.
And so it's kind of the same analogy we've heard over and over: garbage in, garbage out.
Garbage out. That's right.
And so I've seen that personally, where an organization, began to invest, hundreds of thousands of dollars in taking their data. It might have been financial data, it might have been customer response data, it might have been e-commerce metric data, and they start to train a model based on that data, only to learn months later that the AI is hallucinating, which is a real term. For those of you who aren't familiar with AI, AI will begin to hallucinate because it starts to make associations. It kind of, you almost think about the synapses in your brain, and if it's almost like, the AI has schizophrenia, the AI has multiple personality disorder, and it's because we're feeding into it variables that are not accurate, and so it starts to give us outputs that don't make sense.
Yeah, that's right.
And so from there, what we've done on a couple of the projects is where you think about like a data lake or a data warehouse, we've used the concept where we'll say we're going to tap a spring because we know that in the context of this small spring, we have clean data. Just like clean
beautiful.
water,
Yep.
we'll say we have clean data, clean water.
Yep.
And from that little spring, we will use that data to train our large language model. And then from there, we go back and begin the cleanup process to actually get the source of the data in the context of transactions, operational models, financial models, to clean it up systemically so we can actually use the whole of the data source to train the model in the future.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
What I would love to have you articulate in the context of your experience, because your PhD is in data. I mean, this is what you
big data.
This is what you really kind of have spent a lot of your mental energy and your career on. I'd love to have you expound on this topic and to really talk about both the urgency and importance of how executives need to be thinking about tech debt relative to their data in their organizations.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm so glad that you brought that up as a topic to discuss, because it is that was I dedicated a chapter to data as tech debt, because that's something that we just don't think about, right? But again, so companies are very good at collecting information, right? We're very good at, hey, get all these customers, potential customers, we're going to grab their information, we're going to store it. We're very good at collecting information. We're not very good at getting rid of information, right? We have a retention period maybe, but at the end of the retention period, do we actually delete this information, right? Not often. Most of the organizations I see just keep piling it up, and it just keeps growing and growing and growing.
Getting bigger.
And we're even worse at cleaning that, at keeping it valid, informative, right? And so, again, I think you made the point very well that as this information just grows and grows and grows, it becomes stale. And if we then take that information and plug it into an AI model, it's just going to be garbage in, garbage out, because we haven't taken the time to ensure that our data are clean. And so yes, that's a big challenge today, and I think companies are recognizing that, because when you go to implement AI within your organization, the best way to make that useful to you is to augment it with your own data. So you have to take your own information and plug it in there. So yeah, I mean, being able to go back and clean up your data first is super important, because if you don't, that garbage information is going to lead you to make bad decisions. And that was actually one of the things in my doctoral study that I studied, was this concept that bad business decisions are made because of the machine bias, right? We say, look, we put this through an AI, or we put this through our, before AI, we just put it through our algorithm, and this machine spit out this information. And so we have this bias that says, if the machine told us this, the algorithm spit it out, it must be valid. We put more credence in that. And the fact that the algorithm spit it out because we put bad data in, it spit out something bad, we're going to go make a business decision based on bad information. And there was a study recently, actually. Well, I guess it wasn't recently. Maybe it was a year ago, a little longer. There was a study, and I don't remember off the top of my head who the study was done by, but there was a study that was done looking at the people that were closest to the data analysts, the data engineers, and they asked the question, how confident are you in the results of your questions that are, put against this data? And it was something like, 30% maybe, where, we don't have a whole lot of confidence. We know where the data is coming from. We recognize, but, that's kind of where our confidence level is. They create a report based on that information, send it up the chain. They ask the executives, how confident are you in that data? It's like 80%, right? And so the people closest to the data recognize this problem, but they're being asked to provide information, to provide reports up the chain to the executives. The executives get that information and make decisions based on it. And the people closest to the data are saying, wait a minute, you shouldn't make decisions based on that, right? We didn't know that's what you were doing with that information, or with that data we're providing.
That's fascinating. I knew there was a gap. I didn't realize it was that high.
Yeah. And the numbers might be off because I'm pulling it out of my head, but it was in that general vicinity, right? So it was very, very interesting, that study.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Ken. To wrap up, I just would love for you to maybe offer a couple of pragmatic points of advice, specifically to the CEOs, CFOs who are listening. How would you recommend they get started in kind of beginning to take inventory of the tech debt in their organization?
Yeah. So first of all, my first piece of advice would be get the book, because I don't hold any of this like close to the vest, right? The algorithm, as far as how we quantify the tech debt, how we actually measure it, I lay it all out there, and I think that's really the baseline for where to start. You need to look at your tech stack, look at each individual technology in your tech stack, and I have some specific criteria to measure the tech debt of that element. So that's the starting point. You have to quantify the problem. And again, like we talked about earlier, this not only helps you to solidify your understanding of what do we really mean when we're talking about tech debt, it also helps to kind of clarify the periphery, right? So all these other ripple effects, all these things that we're seeing that are that are the problems that are being caused, we can really zero in on the root cause. So quantify your tech debt. That's my first piece of advice. And then set your levels, right? So just like you would with a cybersecurity audit, when you do a cybersecurity audit, you're going to say as an executive team, here's the level of risk that we're willing to accept. And then we go and measure where are we, and we can see the gap. Do the exact same thing with your tech debt, right? Quantify the tech debt, recognize what risk you're taking on, and then make a determination of how much risk do we want to accept here? Because again, you're never going to be at zero. There's always some level of risk. So as the executive leadership of the organization, you have to be able to articulate what's the level of risk that we're willing to accept. And tech debt is risk. So approach it in that same way. Right? Determine the risk and then measure your tech debt and figure out the gaps.
Love it.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, Ken, thank you. This has been an absolute pleasure, and I'm confident that those who are listening today and that those who will watch in the future will find a lot of value in this. And it's interesting, our goal on these isn't typically to try to sell or push a specific thing, but in this case, I am very comfortable recommending that if you haven't already, get Ken's book. STG receives no proceeds from this. Ken does, of course. You wrote the book. But it's definitely one that, from an executive perspective, will be a nice tool to put in your tool bag. And I predict that as executives, particularly that CEO and CFO, embrace and understand tech debt in this way, it will drive a level of connection with their tech team and in their own decision making that will benefit them for years to come. So I think this is something that will have a very long-lasting legacy for organizations. So thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much. Always fun chatting with you.
Okay,
so
sounds good.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay.